So, dear students, colleagues, and friends of architecture, welcome again. Welcome to the last and fourth lecture of the lecture series November Talks 2022 in Prague. And as you know, it is the topic of futures, time for a change. And this lecture series is for many years happening thanks to the initiative and financing of the Foundation Sto, which we are grateful very much to. Today's guest is Mr. Professor Carlo Ratti, who is an architect and engineer at the same time. But not only that, he's also an inventor, an educator, an author, an activist, and really an expert on this topic. Apart from being the founder of his own office, Carlo Ratti Associati, he is professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he directs the MIT Senseable City Lab, which explores how new technologies impact our understanding, design, and lived experience of cities. Carlo Ratti graduated from both the École Nationale de Ponts et Chaussées in Paris and the Politecnico di Torino in Italy. He earned his PhD degree from the Martin Center at the University of Cambridge, UK, and then, 20 years ago, moved as a Fulbright Fellow to MIT and worked with Professor Hiroshi Ishii at the MIT Media Lab. Since his PhD studies, Carlo became publicly active, first as one of the initiators of the Progetto Collegium for the reform of Italian universities, and later as special advisor on urban innovation to the President and Commissioners of the European Commission. Since 2009, he has been a delegate to the World Economic Forum in Davos and a co-chair of the Global Future Council on Cities and Urbanization. He's also a founder of several startups and an author of over 500 publications and projects. We are delighted that he accepted our invitation to the November Talks in Prague. And as you know, the recording of this lecture will be available online at the YouTube channel of the Faculty of Architecture in Prague and also at the web pages of the Sto Foundation. Mr. Ratti, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, and great pleasure to be with all of you here tonight. Should we put the lights a bit down so we see the slides better?
We have it coordinated with the video.
Oh, with the video? Okay.
So the way it is also for the recording.
All right,
But
sure.
it is visible very well. I think it's...
All right. Thanks a lot. So, well, again, you know, it's a great pleasure to be back in your beautiful city. So, let me share with you some of the work we're doing both at MIT in our design office, and then we can have a conversation about that all together. But before that, I want to share with you some images of how people imagine the future. That was back over 100 years ago. This was 1899 to 1910. A number of French artists tried to imagine how life would have been in the year 2000. You know, and they saw something right. For instance, they saw mechanization in agriculture coming, as you see here. They even imagined Roomba, the little robots cleaning our homes, and how they imagined it like, 120 years ago. But they also got some things terribly wrong. And, they would have imagined, they would have expected they would come to Prague with a whale bus from the United States, or that the police would patrol our cities like this. And the point I'm trying to make here is actually the future is not something we can predict. That's actually something that was phrased very, very well by the great Karl Popper in a book called The Myth of the Framework. He says the future is open, it's not predetermined, and thus cannot be predicted, except by accident. The possibilities lying in the future are infinite. And I would say that what you do, what we are doing, what this school is doing. So the point here is actually design design is a way to look at how to transform the present into the future, how to transform the present of our, there's a problem with the mic, however, how to transform the present of our cities into a future. And that's what we're passionate about. We look at this at the scale of the city. Why cities? Well, if you need to remember 4 numbers about cities, just remember the following: 2, 55, 75, and 80. Cities are only 2% of the surface of the planet, but are 55% of the population, 75% of energy consumption, 80% of CO2 emissions. So we can do something to make our cities a little bit more sustainable. That can be a big deal globally. And then, what can we do this? How can we look at this? Well, there's an interesting convergence happening today. Is what you see in this image is something you could say like the digital world and the physical world are coming together. The worlds of bits and the worlds of atoms. One way to look at it is actually that the internet is becoming Internet of Things and is entering in the space we live. And hence it's changing the way we understand cities, the way we can design them, and ultimately the way we can live in them. That's what we're passionate about, and we try to look at it with different operations. First of all, we research at MIT, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but also with a small lab in Singapore and other places around the planet. That's what we try to do at the design office in New York, in Turin, in London, and also with some of the startups that came out of both of them over the past few years. So the key thing behind all of this, there are different operations, but the key thing is really how to get a different and new relationship between the artificial and the natural world. The first thing I want to share with you is how the artificial, and by artificial here I mean the world of cities, or buildings, or objects, is behaving, is starting to resemble much more the natural world, thanks to data, sensors, and intelligence. Today, for instance, we can look at a city like this. We couldn't a few years ago. That's actually Lisbon, mapped using billions of data points collected from the mobility network. It's a visualization. It was at MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, done by Pedro Cruz from our lab at MIT, now a professor at Northeastern. But again, it shows you how data can turn like the world of the artificial into something we can understand, much more like the world of the natural. I'll show you another example from our lab that's one of the oldest projects from our lab. It's a project that dates back from 2006. In that case, what you see here is a pavilion at the Venice Biennale. As you might know, the Venice Biennale is a big exhibition about architecture, planning, art. Every couple of years, is Architecture Biennale. Every other year is the Arts Biennale in the city of Venice. And in this pavilion, for the first time, we actually looked at a lot of data from a city in real time in order to describe, again, all of its flows. And what you see here to the left, you see all the different networks in the city. We picked the city of Rome, given we were showing this in the Venice Biennale. Then the data was sent to a few servers we set up at MIT on campus. You see them there. It was analyzed, visualized, and then results were sent back in near real time to the Biennale. And this was the first time ever, actually, that we mapped a city, that a city was mapped using billions of data points collected from the cell phone network. This was back in 2006. Some of the papers from the time, some of the research, some of the results are still what happened today in your phones. When you actually look at Google Maps and looking how to go to Malastrana, and you see there's a traffic jam, well, some of that actually still based on the initial work that was done at the time in the first experiment to look at all the data we produce to describe a city. For instance, I thought I'd show you an image, a little video, of a moment that happened that summer, that was 2006, during the Biennale, during a very special event, very similar to what's happening right now during the World Cup. Well, 2006 was also the World Cup. As you might recall, actually, the final of the World Cup was Italy and France playing, and Italy winning the cup. Look at what happened in the cell phone network in Rome that day. You see the city of Rome, you see the river, you see the Colosseum, you see all the people moving here and there. You see the different levels. You see that's the morning before the match. You see up there. In a moment, the match begins, silence. Nobody talks anymore. France scores, Italy scores. Half time, people make a quick call, and then end of normal time, first overtime, second overtime, a famous headbutt by Zidane. And finally, Italy wins. And the day everybody goes to celebrate in the center, you see people moving to that part of the city. And then again, the next day, how people move and respond to local things. So again, that you can see a city in a way we couldn't before we had all these distributed sensors in our pockets and connected with us. Before that convergence, as we were saying, between the digital and the physical world. But using the data, we can also discover other things. For instance, around 100 years ago, a person called Zip, teaching at Harvard, discovered a number of interesting regularities about cities. They're summarized in this book that he published at the time, including something that if you take two cities and you want to estimate the flows between the cities, what you do something similar to what happens in gravitational physics by looking at the population of one city, population of the other one, and the distance. So it's P1, P2 divided by distance square or distance power alpha, where alpha is between 1 and 2. And using this data, we actually recently discovered an extension to that law we call universal visitation law of human mobility that again we couldn't see before because of the lack of looking at frequencies. What we discovered is actually that there's something very interesting. What is stable, what is preserved from a physical point of view about how we move in cities is not only the overall flows, but also the frequency, the product of the ratio and the distance. Or another thing that we discovered recently is something that puzzled me since the days when I was a student, a PhD student at Cambridge in the UK. And at the time I was living in this college, Darwin College, and I realized I was going from the college to the department, following one route, and from the department to the college, following a different route. And I was consistently inconsistent. So no, it was a higher probability I would follow route A from A to B, one route from A to B, and a different route from B to A. And I was intrigued by that observation. I don't know if it ever happened to use something similar. And I tried to look at this, with data. But at the time, again, there was not enough data. Now, just last year, we published a paper with colleagues in the Brain and Cognitive Science department at MIT. We actually discovered something interesting by looking at data, again, from tens of thousands of people in Boston and in San Francisco, that actually our brain doesn't follow shortest path. Shortest path is symmetrical. If you go A to B, it's the same as B to A. But our brain follows a different thing, which is very similar to actually what many animals do, which is called vector-based navigation, trying to minimize angular deviation from our destination. And again, the way we could look at this is by analyzing all the data. And we've not been able to describe it, understand it, and model this without, again, all the information we can collect in cities. Again, this part of the same thing I was showing before. I'll give you another example. If you look at this, that's actually simple data, taxi data in New York. Every dot is a taxi pickup or drop off. Which place is this one, by the way? Any thoughts? No? Yes, JFK. JFK Airport, so that's the airport. If you zoom out, you see JFK is down there. Then you see Manhattan and all of the boroughs. And then we ask ourselves an initial question. This question was actually before Uber launched Uber Pool, the sharing of rides. And the question was, well, if you look at those 2 points in Manhattan, you got hundreds of thousands of trips connecting them in the course of the year. Some days you got over 1,000 trips per day. So how many of those trips could be shared by two people going more or less in the same direction? If you think about this, is actually what happened, I think, to many of you, to many of us. You're in a hotel in New York, in another city, in Prague. You're going to the airport. Next to you, there's somebody else with a trolley going somewhere. It turns out, going to the same destination as you could have shared the ride, but you simply didn't know it. So we wanted mathematically to quantify that. Sometimes we say when you got big data, you need big math or new mathematics. So we teamed up with colleagues in network science, Steven Strogatz in particular, a great mathematician. And we approach a problem, we're using network science because traditional tools wouldn't work with such large amount of data. You see here what we call shareability network down there, that allow you to show how many trips could be shared. And what we discover is in the upper left corner over there. What you see on the x-axis, you see the delay in arrival. Maybe you share a ride, you will arrive 1, 2, or 3 minutes late. You see that in seconds. But actually, on the y-axis, you got the number of rides you can share. And the interesting thing is actually that if you just take a small delay, say less than 3 minutes, you can actually take everybody to destination with 40% less vehicles than what we have today. Now, the interesting thing is that when this was published, it started a nice conversation online. A lot of people started discussing it. The New York Times did an article about this. And Uber reached out. We started the first collaboration between MIT and Uber. And as you might know today, Uber Pool, Uber Share allows exactly that. And when you look at Uber Pool, Uber Share, or similar services by the likes of Didi, Lyft in different countries, Grab, 66, and so on, they become like a major industry globally. Now, the interesting thing for me is that all other things being equal, when you're combining 2 trips into one, it means instead of 2 cars on the road, you go on only 1, which means less congestion in our cities, less pollution, and less energy consumption next to us. So again, an example of how by looking at data and analyzing data, we can rethink how a city works, and it can have actually consequences, either because you implement it or other people inspired by it will implement it. On a more recent paper, what we looked at is another problem in cities, same data in New York, and that's about dispatching. If you think about the future, most people anticipate that with self-driving cars, we will need much less, we'll have much more sharing. And then dispatching becomes very interesting, how you match cars and people. And here's a little video about what we discovered in New York. And again, the paper, if you're interested in looking more at mathematics, you can download all the papers from our website. But again, analyzing big data in order to see, in this case, how dispatching could be done in a different way. Another thing that always fascinated us is about looking at the city like a living organism, also because of all the products we consume and all the waste we generate. And in this project, for instance, we started by looking at this computer. If you look at this computer on this here, today you know everything about it. Every chip in this machine, you know where it was produced, how it came together on the planet, how it became this computer. But a few years from now, you sell it, you stop using it, somebody at one point will throw it away. And then you know very little about it. Sometimes a lot of electronics ends up where it shouldn't end up. Another way to say this is that today we know everything about the global supply chain, but we know very little about the global removal chain, about what happens to things when we stop using them. And so in this project, we started putting little tags on waste and follow waste around. Here you see the first deployment in Seattle. Quite a few years ago, we put little tags on trash. Every single thing between, anything from a banana peel to a computer. And after adding all the tags on them, we started following them. So here you see 3,000 objects, the day of deployment in Seattle. After a couple of days, you see some of the main landfills next to Seattle. But actually a big surprise, how far stuff started to travel. Sometimes in crazy, unexpected ways. Look at the trace that went all the way to Chicago, changed its mind, and went back to California. And stuff kept on moving and traveling after 1 or 2 months. That was totally unexpected. We thought the Firewall Symphony was the right music here. So all of these shows you, again, how with data we can look at a system like the artificial, a city, a building, and so on. We can look at it like a living thing. I want to show with you still a few examples. Is the word of autonomy. Now, you all heard about autonomy. Autonomy is about autonomous cars, for instance. You jump into a car, and the car has enough intelligence, has a brain, not a human brain, but an artificial brain that will help the car navigate the city, take you to destination. Now, in this project, we started working with the city of Amsterdam a few years ago, 5 years ago. In Amsterdam, the mayor was also, like many mayors globally, very excited about autonomy. But when you look at Amsterdam, in the center, you got not much asphalt, but you got a lot of waterways. You got a lot of canals. And so we started thinking, well, why not to look at not autonomy from the traditional point of view about autonomous vehicles, but why not to look at autonomous boats? We call them robots. So what could you do with a robot? You could actually use it to move things around. You could use it to move people around. You could use it to monitor the canals and get information from the canals. Or you could use it like little pixels that would connect and create like a living, responsive architecture. Imagine when you need a bridge. All the elements come together and create a temporary bridge, or a floating stage, or an infrastructure for in case of an emergency in the city. Which, by the way, is nothing new. If you look at this, the city of Venice has been doing this for a long, long time. It's a very special moment in the city of Venice. It's called the Festa del Redentore, when all the gondolas come together and create a temporary bridge. But the beautiful thing about technology sometimes, it simply allows us to do what we've always done, or what we always wanted to do, but to do it in a different way. Well, I'll show you now how we developed this. We started with small boats. This is a 1-to-4 model. You see it here. We tried different type of propulsion, like this one, or this one with little water jets. This one, again, 3D printer. Today it will take you very little, as you all know, to 3D print and mount something and prototype something. It was the first test in the canals in Amsterdam. You see it's very controllable, can go symmetrical one way and the other way. You see it here again. We told the mayor, even if the project fails, no problem, we'll open a toy company, because everybody seems to have so much fun playing with this in the city. But to do that, in order to navigate autonomously, you need to do many things. Again, describe the city, the living city, and all what happens in it. Looking just, for instance, at all the different flows happening. That's monitoring all the vessels in the canals in Amsterdam, as you see here. Or adding intelligence to the robot in order to scan the city in 3D. So that's actually how a robot sees the environment. Every second you get 300,000 data points, high resolution, that helps the thing to move. And so these are the eyes of the robots, the eyes of the autonomous system. But then you need to teach the autonomous system how to avoid obstacles. And that's actually what you see here is the MIT swimming pool turned into a lab in order to test these, again, are very small boats, 1-to-4 scale, how they're moving, how they get intelligence from the environment, and they analyze it in order to avoid every type of obstacle. This is Wei, one of our postdocs. He was promoted to senior postdoc after this experiment. But you see here all the information, basically the system is like a human system. It receives from the environment, analyzes it, like not with a human brain, with artificial intelligence, and uses it to navigate. And again, if you're interested, you can look at all the papers online. I'll show you now, after 5 years, now this also has been turned into a company, but this is the last research project, was the 1-to-1 boat that's been tested in the canals as we speak, and here's a little video.
This is Lucy. Lucy is a rowboat, a fully autonomous, zero-emission boat that operates on urban waterways, and she can change the way cities work. As congestion and emissions continue to rise, while cities continue to grow, the existing infrastructure of many cities struggles to keep up. Rowboats offer a solution by moving road traffic to the water. By bringing passengers from A to B, or as an on-demand boat, taking you anywhere you want. And they can also help the city as a multi-purpose workboat. Take Crystal. She is equipped to collect household waste to free the streets from heavy garbage trucks. Rowboats are fully autonomous, so they navigate without a skipper and can operate 24/7. In order to sail by themselves, rowboats need to perceive their environment and recognize objects such as bridge pillars, floating objects, and of course other vessels. The primary source of information comes from a LiDAR sensor, but rowboats are also equipped with cameras, GPS, and a digital compass. Rowboat's onboard computer combines and processes all of the data and runs the rowboat software so it can successfully complete its mission plan. After 5 years of development, testing, and experimentation, we have now successfully enabled autonomy on the full-scale prototypes. Rowboat is ready for the next step. Join us and let's unlock the potential of urban waterways together.
And of course, we look at different scales, at the scale of the city, at the scale of the mobility system, but the scale of the building itself with sensors, intelligence actuators can start behaving like a real living organism. In this case, let's say it's a project by a design office. The building is a building from the 50s, is the place where the Agnelli Foundation is based. The Agnelli Foundation is behind one of the largest conglomerates globally, industrial conglomerates globally. And in this building, we tested something which is actually how the building, by using simple sensors to detect the presence of people, in an anonymized way, of course, can start responding in terms of heating, lighting, and cooling. And so, on the one hand, save energy, on the other hand, respond better to the people living in it. I like the fact that some of the reviews were looking at how this is, again, avoiding thermostat wars, but the bottom line is you can make the building both more sustainable and more responsive to the individual. Both in the old part of the building, you saw the building, that side is a 1950s side, but also the other side of the building, which is early 20th century, which is, again, it's which we totally transform, but we is able to respond in a similar way. So the bottom line for all of this is that if you think about what is life is about sensing information, about processing and responding to the information, well, that thing is happening more and more everywhere in the city, at the level of the city, at the level of the things we use in the city, in the whole world of the artificial, including clearly in buildings. So that was, we saw before was from the artificial to the natural, from the world of the artificial to, again, to making it behave more like natural thanks to intelligence, sensors, and actuators. But the other interesting thing that's happening is how actually we can go from the natural to the artificial. So how the world of the natural can become much more embedded in our cities, in the places we live in. And that's the other convergence. If you look at this as a combination of the two, is for looking at the same thing, but from the other pole, from the pole starting from nature and bringing it closer to us in our cities. And actually something I like is a quote by Élisée Reclus, who was a great anarchist geographer writing again at the end of the 19th century. And he was dreaming of a time when man could have the double advantage of access to the pleasures of the city, but at the same time, enjoy the freedom that lies in the freedom of nature. And that's an old thing. People have tried to do this in many different ways. Look, for instance, at the 20th century. Look at modernism. This is Frank Lloyd Wright, Broadacre City was the idea to bring actually man closer to nature, but that was done at the time by actually expanding the city outwards into the countryside. And well, we know how all of that happened. It didn't happen in a very pleasant way because we ended up by destroying all was close to the city and actually with endless suburbia or exurbia. So I would say that the challenge here, when you look at the other thing from natural to the artificial, is a bit the opposite, especially in this century. The past century in Europe and the United States was about big urban, building, new urban fabric being built. But in this century, cities in Europe and the United States are not growing. Cities are growing in other parts of the world. And so I would say that the goal is the opposite. Not how to bring the city outwards into nature, but bring nature closer to us in the city. That's a building in our home city of Milan called the Vertical Forest by a colleague and friend by Stefano Boeri. But the same principle can be, or similar principles can find different type of applications. In Milan, more or less at the same time, we did this small project in the core of Milan next to the Scala Theatre. That was the first project in Italy by Patrick Blanc, who developed the vertical wall. And what we did was create a public space. It's a Trussardi fashion house next to Piazza della Scala, next to the Scala Theatre, as I said. and here was about creating this place in the core of Milan where there's very little nature to create like a public space with these green vertical walls suspended above it that becomes a place to meet people, to enjoy each other's company, and also enjoy the interaction with nature. The same thing we're doing in Milan is one of the biggest developments now in Milan called Milan Innovation District. Is the former site of the World Expo 2015. And actually here we won a competition with Lend-Lease, Australian developers, to turn it into the city's innovation district. And what was the so-called Decumano, which was like 2 miles of asphalt where 20 million people went by during the expo, is going to be probably the longest linear park in Milan connecting all of the district. Or in this project, just from a few weeks ago, just completed recently in Singapore. It's a collaboration we did with BIG. We won together a competition. And what we did here is one of the tallest buildings in Singapore. The highest part of the building is offices. The lowest part is service apartment. And what we decided to do was try to create a new type of public space in the middle, where people would come together, congregate, and meet and work and spend time. One of the things I suffer most when I'm in Singapore is the fact that actually you cannot go outdoors. You're basically locked into your apartments, everything is air conditioned. But actually outdoors, most of the year you can spend, if with a bit of shading and a bit of natural control, it's very, very pleasant. You can be there, it can be your office out in the green. And so the place in the middle is under green spring in the middle. It becomes a new type of public space. Here you see the entrance to the building. And here is some of the images. You find the latest one published in just a few weeks ago. This is when I was there a couple of months ago, with the facade being populated by the trees. In this project, we just finished in Italian countryside. It's an old traditional countryside house by Mutti. Mutti is one of the global producer of high-end, he is one of the leaders of the agri-tech valley in Italy, in northern Italy. And in this case, we try to take the idea of the round plan, that you know very well, Adolf Loos round plan, but actually try to do it again by putting nature at the core of it. That's one of the key values for the company. The company is next door, that's the residence, but actually where he lives, the owner and the CEO of the company. And so the whole space is structured around this round plan with this 12-meter high tree in the middle that becomes what organizes the whole space. Only in this small project on the Himalayas, this is close to Darjeeling, on the hills in northern Himalayas next to Sikkim. And what we did here was do something similar with one additional thing, is we wanted to engage a lot the local community in transforming this. And so these elements in nature become a frame to be filled in different way with natural materials by the local community. So we just provide a frame, and then the frame is little by little turned into the living place for the community. Or this is a couple of projects we're doing right now in Milan. This is under construction. Both of them are next to the Prada Foundation, for those of you who've been in Milan. This is close to this. This is a large rail yard called Porta Romana, and together with Liz Diller, as you might know, Liz Diller was one of the key people, Diller and Scofidio, doing the High Line in New York. With Liz Diller and Lee Polisano, we won the competition to turn it into a new piece of city. And again, nature is used to connect the city north to south with a new park, and also east to west again with a suspended, something similar to, if you want, to the approach of the High Line, suspended over the railway. You got this green connection connecting one side of the city to the other one, two parts of the city that have been disconnected for decades because of the big rail yard. Or in this project was just before the COVID was the opening of Milan Design Week. As you might know, Milan Design Week is one of the main events in the world of design and architecture. And here, the theme that was given to us, it was the opening act for 2018 Salone, Milan Design Week. And we said, okay, we're happy to do the opening act, but then we want to make sure that design will tackle not just furniture, but actually, traditionally, Il Salone comes from as a furniture fair, but actually tackles the key challenges we face today, starting from nature and bringing nature to our cities, and also being able to change climate. And what we did was bring a small garden in the center of Milan. To the left, you see the Duomo, the cathedral. To the right, you got the Royal Palace. And bring this small garden. But then we try to use energy from the sun in order to change the climate underneath. And we like the idea, the dream of having a garden, where as you move from one room to the other one, you're just moving through seasons. Imagine a garden where you got 4 seasons at the same time. You go spring, summer, fall, and winter, and you do that in a sustainable way by actually changing the climate by using the energy from the sun and in a circular way compensating between heating and cooling. So here you see it built with different views. You see, one part was the winter part. This was in April. Salone, Milan Design Week is usually in April and can be, that year was almost, in 2018 was almost 30 degrees, but it was sustainably was a very cold corner, the winter side, the spring side with blossoming flower, the summer side, super sweaty. We just missed the mosquitoes, like to get a proper Milanese summer. All right, so we've seen at the beginning how to start from the artificial world, the world of cities, of buildings, of objects, and using data, sensors, intelligence to turn it into something closer to the world of the natural. And here how the world of the natural actually can become much more embedded into the world of the artificial. How nature itself can become a building block for our built environment. But the truth is, in most cases, it really is about the coevolution, it's about the convergence of both. In both cases, about how we can move left to right and right to left at the same time. And here I just want to share with you a project we're doing in Helsinki at the moment that really that plays with both dimensions at the same time. And that is one of the largest decarbonization projects in cities today. The project started 2 years ago, when the mayor launched something called the Helsinki Energy Challenge. The problem of Helsinki was very clear. Helsinki has there's something very, very positive in Helsinki. All the heating, as you might imagine, because of the latitude, most of the energy consumption is because of heating in Helsinki. And then all of the heating happens through district heating. Normally, that's very good. District heating, as you know, means you're producing power. As you produce power, you get as a byproduct a lot of hot water. And then you run the hot water through the city and you heat the city. At the same time, the power plants in Helsinki are mostly coal power plants. And the mayor committed to decommission them by the end of the decade. So the question he had 2 years ago was, how can we find a sustainable way to heat the city and to replace coal as the main source of energy for Helsinki? He wasn't very happy with the solutions he was being given locally. And so what he did, he launched a global competition. What he did, I think, was quite brave. Usually, even in architectural competitions, cities try to minimize risk. This was a different type of competition. It was much more similar to what the X Prize Foundation does in the United States. The X Prize Foundation, as you might know, they put like a prize in the United States, $10 million, and they allow people in teams competing from all over the world in order to address a problem. And as you might know, like SpaceX and other ventures came out of an X Prize challenge a few years ago. So he did the same thing. 2 years ago, he launched a competition, over 250 global teams, big companies, multinational, and so on, competed, 10 finalists, and then in the end, the winners, we were one of the winners with 3 others. When I say we, this was done by our design office in New York. They ran the competition, but also in a very interdisciplinary way. When you look at the city, it's mandatory that we must look at this through different angles. In this case, you see Ramble, large engineering firm, being able to cover many dimensions of engineering. Transolar, probably a #1 engineers for climate engineering, based in Germany. SBP, Jörg Schleich office. Jörg Schleich, as you might know, is some of the most beautiful lightweight structures in the 20th century. Being lightweight is the first thing to be sustainable, because being lightweight means using less matter and hence, less embodied energy, embodied carbon. But also other companies, like, big companies such as Danfoss or Schneider Electric, OP from a financial point of view, Squint Opera, who help us to engage a broader community with the project. I'll show you a little video and I'll tell you a bit more about the solution.
We're excited to present to you the Hot Heart, an innovative solution to decarbonize Helsinki. Here is how we'll do it.
All right, so you saw the gist of it in the movie, in the video. Now, again, there's good news and bad news globally. Good news is what you see to the left is actually the price of renewables been going down immensely. What you see to the left is actually the decrease in the price of wind power over time. And, the reality today is that around the world, if you need to produce 1 megawatt hour, remember 1 megawatt hour, the key unit of energy, then if you do it with renewables, with sun or wind, is usually the cheapest way to do it. Around the world, it will cost you between $10 and $30 to produce 1 megawatt hour with sun or wind. So that's great news. Then you might say, so why don't we use just renewables everywhere? Well, the bad news is what you see to the right. And to the right, it means that renewables are very intermittent. Sometimes you got too much wind, you produce too much. Sometimes you got too little wind. Sometimes you got too much sun, sometimes you don't. And so the problem is what happens there, then you produce too much or too little, and prices go up and down, which is what you see to the right side of the picture. Well, you might say, okay, sure, but why don't we use batteries? Yes, that's a good idea, but actually, think about the following. We said that 1 megawatt hour will cost you 10 to 30 euros or dollars to produce, but one battery for the same megawatt hour will cost you 200,000. So $20 to produce, 200,000 to store. The bottom line is that batteries are still too expensive and their prices are not going down fast enough. Plus, there's a lot of cost for batteries at scale. You need to mine a lot of lithium and other materials in order to make batteries. So there's also a lot of energy cost and environmental costs for batteries. So in this case, we thought about a different idea. And the idea is something that, if you're an engineer, this is not what you want to do normally. From a thermodynamic point of view, that's like what you call it like a thermodynamic crime. You take in energy, power, electric energy, and you turn it into heat. Normally you don't do it because you got a higher form of energy and you turn it into heat. You can go one way but not the other way back. But in this case, ultimately, you need to heat the city. So sooner or later, you need to turn it into heat. And so our idea was, why don't we turn it into heat earlier and store it? Call it like a battery, a thermal battery, a battery that stores the heat. The interesting thing when you do the calculation is actually that if a battery for 1 megawatt hour as a regular one will cost you 200,000, as I was saying before, the same battery for 1 megawatt hour, but a thermal battery will cost you $200. And at that point, everything changes. At that point, everything makes sense. So if you look at this, you got to the left, you got all the different sources to produce energy. You want to be flexible. Already things, since we won the competition, the energy landscape has changed immensely in Europe and around the world. So what you want to do is actually be compatible with different energy sources in 2030. You see, by the way, to the left, the different mix, and in the lower part, you see also, how the different mix can come together. Then you turn that into what we call the hot heart, the place to store the energy. And then from there, you run it through a district heating system. So you reuse all the pipes already in the city. You simply plug it in the system, the storage with the pipe. And as you're doing it, we said, well, why don't you do it to capture two additional benefits? The first one is when you're doing this, you're also equalizing the national grid, the Finnish or the Nordic country grid. And so you got a benefit to capture from there. But the other thing is you got beautiful public spaces floating in the city, in the port next to the city. So why not to turn it into an attraction for people and something, again, where people can meet, most importantly, where we can go and learn about infrastructure, about energy, about how to address the challenges we face together. And I think that's not negligible. The only way we can actually tackle some of the big challenges we face, starting from climate change, is if we do it all together. So we thought that actually that place could become a place with added value by bringing people together, people from Helsinki, from Finland, or even tourists visiting the city from all over the world. I will not bore you with the location where we decided to place it next to Helsinki. It's in the bay. It has to be very well connected to the existing district heating. You want to reuse as much as possible what is already there. You've seen this in the video, the different elements with the 4 biodomes. They become a place where people can go and spend time and enjoy the space. Even using just an incredibly small fraction of the energy, you can create a very special biodome for people from Helsinki and abroad. And something interesting, I told you before, the engineers from a structural point of view, SBP, York, as I mentioned, he did some of the most beautiful lightweight structures in the 20th century. One beautiful one he did is based on a structure similar to what we are using, which is very similar to a bicycle wheel. A bicycle wheel, believe it or not, is very well optimized. It's called a tensegrity structure. The name tensegrity comes from Bucky Fuller. And it's very, very optimized because you got a lot of compression in the rim, but you stabilize against buckling using the spokes. And so if you do the same thing, but you scale it up, so it's like a big bicycle wheel, it's 225-meter diameter, then you get a very efficient way to create the floating islands and the basis of the hot cart. The pipes, the rim, is done using the same steel that's used for pipelines. So you get pipelines curved, and then you got the cables in order to stabilize them against buckling or other instabilities. So just in a nutshell, we believe we can be completed before the deadline of 2030 set by the mayor to decarbonize the city by 2030. We believe, if all goes well, can be completed before that. All the energy, remember, the key thing, 1 megawatt hour. All the energy for Helsinki is 6,000 gigawatt hour. 1 megawatt hour, you multiply by 1,000, you get 1 gigawatt hour, and then you multiply by 6,000. That's all what the city needs. Well, all of that can be stored in the hot cart. One thing that surprises is that when we started, we thought, well, we're doing all of this. You need to invest to pay for the project and so on. Well, people in Helsinki might need to pay energy more than what they pay today. It turns out you can actually provide this at 10% less than the cost today and still be able to financially make sense, and still the project financially as a whole makes sense. The 2 bonuses I mentioned before, load balancing the grid, but also creating an amazing public space for people to be engaged and participate in the project. And yes, the total cost is expensive, but the important thing is not that it's actually how you can pay it back. It looks like you can pay itself back quite quickly. And what we like to do, what we propose is actually not to do it just with funding coming from the government or banks, but actually open this up to citizens. So could this become also an example of how together, something like crowdfunding on a massive scale, we can actually do projects to change our cities and to make them more sustainable. So I think I'll stop it here. I think I used the hour was allocated, so we have a bit of time for Q&A and for discussion. If you want, I got much more slides, but I think I'll do a stop here. Also because I don't know if I got flu or something, but I kind of lost my voice today. But the bottom line I want to say is, again, think about natural and artificial and the separation between the two. You could say a lot of the challenges we're facing come by looking at the two worlds as totally separate entities. As architects, as planners, as designers, what we can do is actually try to bridge the two and bridge from one side to the other using technology to make the world of the artificial much more similar to the natural world, but also bridging the other way from the world of nature into the world of the artificial. And the truth is how, in most projects, we can look at a future where the two come together in a seamless coevolution. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you very much. And now questions, please. There are two mics around, so who has a question gets a mic. And please ask anything you want to know.
Questions, ideas, thoughts, anything you'd like to share. Yes.
Up there.
There's a hand up there.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity and thank you for the lecture. It was very interesting. But my question is about the hot hearts. Yeah. So you're proposing in general, because I obviously don't know the calculations and all the engineering stuff that was going on there, but you are proposing storing the energy like in water in these like islands, and then conducting it with a very, very long tube into the city. I would like to ask about the energy loss.
Yeah. No, thanks.
Here, for example, we are conducting we are taking the water through the tubes, but for example, just in an apartment building. I imagine that in this very large structure, there will be very big loss of the heat and the energy. I would wonder if the system is still efficient after such
Yeah, no, thanks for asking this. So you need to separate two different things. One is actually the existing system, which is working like that today. So today you got power plants, as I mentioned, they run with coal, and then you got as a byproduct, you got all the hot water, you run into the city, and you heat the city. And the system is what it is today. Yes, you got a bit of losses, but all the pipes are very insulated. The water is around 90 degrees in Helsinki. Some other systems, it can go up to 110 or 120 in other cities, but in Helsinki is around 90 degrees. And, that's usually a very efficient way to heat the city. You got a little bit of loss, but you centralize it. Is usually, for a number of reasons, district heating is considered much more efficient than if you have everybody with a small boiler. If you got everybody with a small boiler, you also have a lot of losses locally, and you need to distribute all the gas or whatever you're using to heat and so on. So that is one part of the system. So we are reusing 100% what is already there, which is state-of-the-art, which is, overall good. Yes, you got a bit of losses, but overall it's seen as one of the greenest way you can heat a city by just, producing centralized hot liquid, hot fluids, in this case water, and distribute it. The only thing we're adding is very simple, is instead of having the coal power plant, we're saying, why don't we get energy when it's produced by wind or sun, but mostly wind in Finland, and especially sometimes when you produce too much. The more wind power you have, the more you get to the case where prices go down and sometimes become negative. In places such as Scotland is producing a huge amount of wind power, the former prime minister in the UK called it like the Saudi Arabia of wind. And in Scotland, you often get negative prices. In Finland, it also happens a bit less, but it happens. So basically, when you got overproduction, you turn it into heat, and then you run it. So there's not inefficiency there. You actually help in terms of efficiency, because when you got too much production, then you're using some of them in order to turn it into heating. So going back to your point, losses is a very important point, but we are somehow the existing system, what it is, it works pretty well. What we're only changing is the input, not from coal, again, not sustainable, but actually from wind, especially when there's overproduction, and it can be turned into hot water, into charging the hot heart, call it thermal batteries, and then they can run through the city. But it's a very good point. Thanks for asking.
Another question, please.
Yeah.
Hello, good afternoon.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the lecture. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
I was mostly interested in the flow of the presentation from the very beginning of the renders done 100 years ago about how we envisioned the future and now how we are envisioning our future, and the transition between looking at a more comfortable lifestyle to going into some existential questions. And I think this is very interesting to look at the reflection of fiction on reality and what fiction was 100 years ago and what fiction is now. So I think this was very important to materialize our vision of the future and how we are looking at more than a robot that cleans the house, and now we're looking at things that would not lead to our extinction. I have one comment, or maybe a question that I can ask, is that I noticed that most of the solutions are technology-oriented, and most of the examples we're giving are in the rich or quite wealthy countries. And I think that most of the solutions are well implemented in the Western society, but I think that environmental justice will encourage us to look at poorer countries that maybe are suffering more from the climate change and the impact that we're all making to our planet. So how can we implement or translate those very advanced, innovative technological solutions to become a sort of a global or planetary infrastructure that does not discriminate according to wealth? So
yeah, no, thanks for asking. And it's a great question. I was just looking at it. I want to share with you a project, favelas. Sorry. You're right. Maybe let me see if I find it here. Sorry, I should look it up. But I want to say, no, you're right. I think today, just in the selection today, maybe I should have thought about this in a different way. But in selection today, you're right. Some of the projects look at very advanced economies and so, but that's not the case. We're doing a lot of projects. I'd like to show you something else, which is we call Favela 4D, how we can try to bring favelas. Favelas are informal settlements in South America, especially working with the city of Rio de Janeiro on the biggest favela in Brazil, Corocina, in order to integrate it better into the formal city, as well as we're working with in Indonesia or in South Africa on other projects. I didn't include them today, so sorry about that, but I want to say that for us is also very important. Somehow we follow both at the lab and in the office, when there's like a request, a competition. In the case of Helsinki came from there, but also we try to be engaged as much as possible in the Global South, and we got quite a number of projects there. So you're absolutely right, and sorry I didn't include them. Maybe if I find them later, I'll show you a couple of slides. But the important thing is that I don't think there's going to be one solution fits all, and solutions are going to be dependent on a number of parameters. For instance, even if you look at just Europe, the solution in Helsinki is not going to be the same solution as, say, Italy, or France, where actually storage can happen very effectively by what is called pumped hydro, so just pump water up when there's overproduction of electricity, and you use that as a battery, effectively, in order to, from hydropower, in order to you store as potential energy, and you get it when you need it. So somehow, solutions, you're right, are going to be dependent on many parameters, are going to be dependent on the climate, on where you are, and clearly also on the technologies available in that country. But maybe my mistake in the selection, but we are doing a lot of projects in the Global South, and a lot of the battles we're talking about are going to be won or lost in the Global South. So thanks for mentioning that.
Thank you. Another question? So before somebody thinks out that question, okay, I have one in spare.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I would like to ask you, because what we have seen was kind of research, applied research, prototypes, very inspiring. What's your ambition? Are your ambition to finish as a scientist, drawing papers, or to inspire by kind of prototypes? Or do you have some ambition also to scale it up to practice and to promote in policy? That's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's another very, very important question. Now, the first thing is, what would you say is the role of the designer, of the architect? Well, I think that role can be what you could call like a mutagen. So trying to insert mutation or propose things and let people decide if they want to follow that or not. Cities decide if they want to adopt it or not. So the first thing, which is super different than how architecture thought in the past century. If you think, remember there's a beautiful picture by Le Corbusier presenting, actually that was exactly 100 years ago, if I'm not wrong. 100 or 101 years ago. It was more or less this time of the year at the so-called Pavillon de l'Esprit Nouveau in Paris, where Le Corbusier presents what's called the plan voisin for the city. And if you look at that, his idea was, well, I got a solution, we just need to implement it at scale. And he presents this beautiful image, I'm sure you've all seen it, of Le Corbusier presenting with his hand the plan voisin. And that hand is the hand of Le Corbusier, the hand of the architect. But you could say it's the hand of God, making decision, one person making a decision for millions of people, without even bothering to ask them if they wanted that. By the way, the plan voisin was based on demolishing all of Paris, leaving just Notre Dame and a couple of other things and replacing it with modernist towers. So I think that was a lot the approach of the 20th century. And I think we need to forget it. And we need to forget it, and we need to think about ourselves in a different way, as agents of change. And agents of change means you can propose something with a video. You can propose something on a prototype. You can try something, and some things will fail, something will succeed. People will be the one to decide if they want to adopt something in their city or not. And different cities might decide to go in different directions. We are seeing, I showed a lot of things about shareability. The big question at the beginning was, will people want to share a ride, which makes our city more sustainable? It turns out, yes, because Uber Pool and other systems are being very successful. But in many cities, still people think that the car is a status symbol. So in many countries, that's different. So I think we should, as designers, architects, planners, we should try to propose things, to make things tangible, to make prototypes, to test things, but then ultimately let people, citizens, decide what type of city they want to live in. So that's the first thing. It's very different, as I say, from the idea of the 20th century when people thought they had the solution. I think, again, this is very similar to what nature does. What will nature do? Nature would try something, a mutation. Some mutations will fail, but some mutation will succeed and actually change the whole ecosystem. I think what we should do as architects or designers should be something similar. Actually propose, be mutagenic agents into the world of the built environment. Now, in that thing, then the second part of your question is very important, is, how far do you want to go? And, we've seen projects that started just with a video and had huge impact. As I said, the project about sharing rides was a scientific article, mathematics, and a couple of videos and a nice interactive website, and ended up having a significant impact. In other cases, you might want to be involved yourself in scaling up. And yes, I didn't show it today, but between the lab and the office, we've come up with a number of patents or ideas, and we ourselves did a few companies. We've raised around $250 million to do companies. The biggest one is in mobility, in sustainable mobility in cities. But we got now 4 companies in between the US and Europe. And so sometimes yes, you might want to do it, but it doesn't matter to me. To me, the important thing as a designer is how you can show how things could be different, and then you let people decide if they want to go in that direction or not. And yes, you can help. You can see sometimes if you see it doesn't scale, maybe you want to help in the scaling process. If you see somebody else is taking, it's even better. You just can move to another project. So those are the 2 key points. The first point is let's not think we got this solution. A lot of the things. I'll tell you another thing. When you're doing that, sometimes it's also good to show something which can be dangerous. And in the first project I showed you, the one from the Venice Biennale 2006, well, in that project, mapping and tracking cell phones, we know that that was incredibly powerful for describing cities in the future, but we know also that that was incredibly risky because it means, surveillance, it means many other things. And what we wanted to do was actually to show it publicly and let people decide. And different societies might decide in different ways. Somehow what you can do is similar to what white hat hackers do. You got 2 types of hackers. You got hackers with a black hat, and they want to destroy a system. But hackers with a white hat, they usually want to show the vulnerability of a system so you can fix it. And I think that's what we can play as well. Sometimes we might want to show even a potential of the city, which goes in the wrong direction, just to warn that that's not, or to put a warning and say, do we really want to go in that direction? So anyway, again, the 2 sides of the question, very, very, very nice and very important. One, how we can look at the solution you propose. And again, I don't think we should, like in the 20th century, think we got this solution that led to disasters, not only Le Corbusier. I didn't show it today. Our office is working now on the biggest extension of the master plan of Brasilia, done by Lucio Costa and Oscar Niemeyer over 50 years ago. Beautiful city. It doesn't work. Again, a few people just making decisions for millions of people without even thinking about, what people want. Think about Brasilia. It has a beautiful lake in a normal, organic way. That city would have started developing next to the shores of the lake. They simply forgot it because they wanted to design a city that looked like an airplane. When you land, it looks like this, like an airplane with open wings, and they forgot that, there was a beautiful lake. So somehow, the disaster of the 20th century, we don't want to repeat this century. I think the way to do it, you think about our job more as proposing changes, suggestions, transformations, but then letting people decide. And then how much you need to be involved in the scaling? Well, I think it depends. If somebody starts scaling, even better. You can actually move to another project. In some cases, you might want to be more involved. If you look at the companies, one is called Super Pedestrian. It runs among other things, a lot of micromobilities in cities globally, in large number of cities in the US and Europe. That's a way for making cities more sustainable that we decided to scale because we thought it was faster than letting it as a company on its own, so letting the idea on its own. So I think it will depend on your interest, and so for me, it's more about if you think it's a good idea, and if nobody else is taking it on, then, yes, you might want to be involved in a bit further down the line.
Thank you. Any other question? Yes, in the back.
First of all, I would like to say that the presentation was very interesting and to thank you for that.
Thank you.
When it came to the car sharing model that you used Manhattan as an example, which has a very geometric and in a sort of symmetric urbanistic design, I wondered whether the same model applies and is as efficient to other cities which have a more organic landscape with roads with different densities and whatnot.
Yeah, and good question, and thanks for the comment. Yes, it applies. It's not based on the regularity. The sharing is based. There's another paper I didn't show today, but you find on our website. It was published in Nature Scientific Reports. It was looking at shareability in cities globally. And what you find a very simple formula based on the density of people and the length of the network. It's not related to how regular or orthogonal the city is. the network is simply related to the density and the length of your overall network. And if you look at that, you see the shareability actually can happen very successfully globally, which is what led, this was a piece of research we did with, the first piece of research we did with Uber that helped them actually scale up Uber pool in cities globally.
Any other question? So maybe there might be some. My question would be, you are also an educator, and you are a professor at MIT, not only a director of the lab. What do you teach students of architecture?
Yeah, well, you know, look, a couple of things. The first thing is that we think that actually we learn a lot by doing things together. So we try to do a lot of the projects you've been seeing often are done with a class, are done with, you know, with other people, with researchers, with people who want to engage with the lab. So the first thing is that we see, not only in our lab, but more generally at MIT, that learning by doing, or, you know, using the lab as a teaching tool works very well. And that's also an incredible way to bring together people from architecture and planning together with mathematicians and social scientists and complex scientists and so on. So it's a way to learn as you look at the city itself. The city becomes your lab, but it's not only a lab for research, it's a teaching lab. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and that's maybe my suggestion to all of you, is today, if you just look online, you find an incredible amount of solutions. You know, just thanks to the internet, to sharing, you find you know, the craziest shit out there, you know, that you can look at. So the most important thing is more than trying to, you know, I mean, yes, it's important to create new ideas, but the most important thing is being able to tell what is a good idea from a bad idea. And Hemingway, in the last interview he gave before dying, he was really asked about, you know, the most important thing and about his talent. He said, you know, the important thing, and he was regretting, you know, that what he called, I believe, bullshit detector was not working as well as it used to. So I think the important thing, I think, for all of us, and especially to learn in school, is really to understand this, to understand what is a good idea from a bad, telling a good idea from a bad idea, or in other terms, getting a good bullshit detector to be able to discern that.
And how do you distinguish the good idea from the bad idea?
Well, no, I think, you know, but I think, you know, that's part of the teaching thing and so on. And one way is really to explore it further. And once you start taking ideas and taking them down the line, then you see the ones that lead to more fruition or less fruition. So I think, you know, that's the thing. But I think what I want to say is that, especially in today's world where you're exposed to so many different things, the important thing, even before generating new ideas, is to be able to detect, you know, a good one from a bad one.
Thank you very much. If there is no other question, I would like to give you this certificate. It's a little remembrance of being here with us.
Thank you. It's
Thank
beautiful.
you so much. I'm sure my students, all the students, will be Googling your web pages now and starting to learn more. There's such a diversity of different ideas and different results. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks a lot. And thanks a lot. And you know, again, so excited to have been here. And if any of you is one of the cities where we are, in Boston, New York, in Turin, in Singapore, so do stop by. Do come and visit us at MIT. I think, you know, maybe another thing is about the teaching. The important thing is a conversation. Conversation is really sharing ideas, is learning from each other. So looking forward to continuing that. Thanks a lot.